In this video, I'm going to cover my Whirlwind Barbarian build and everything you will need to do millions of damage by level 100. I'm currently in this video only level 86 and I've seen crits over 800k damage. The first part of the build we're going to cover is the skills and the skill tree. Beginning at the top with the basic skills, we're going to put 1 point into lunging strike and 1 point into enhanced lunging strike. In this build, using the aspect of expectant will make good use of the basic skill. Using a basic skill 2 to 3 times will allow us to increase our whirlwind damage by 30%. Starting with the next section, core skills, we're going to max out 5 points into whirlwind. This will be our main damage dealing attack. We're also going to take enhanced whirlwind as well as violent whirlwind for more damage. You are also going to need the passive pressure point to take advantage of vulnerable damage. The next section is the defensive skills. Here we're going to be taking 5 points into Rallying Cry for movement speed and resource generation. You also want Enhanced Rallying Cry and Tactical Rallying Cry, which is required for this build. Next, we will also put 5 points into Challenging Shout for damage reduction. This is extremely important late game as we need all the damage reduction we can get. You also are going to need Enhanced Challenging Shout and Tactical Challenging Shout. Next are the brawling skills. Here, you're going to need 1 point into War Cry, Enhanced War Cry, and Power War Cry for additional damage. I like to have 3 points into the passive Booming Voice and 3 points into Guttural Yell. This gives you less downtime between shouts and more damage reduction. I also put 1 point into Aggressive Resistance so that I can have 3 points into Prolific Fury for more resource generation. We currently have not taken any action skills in the weapon mastery section, but we do make use of a few of the passive skills. You can use Rupture if you manage to apply a large amount of bleeding damage to enemies. This is especially useful against elites and bosses with a large HP pool late game. However, I do not focus on bleach damage as much for some other builds do. Our first passive will be 1 point into Hamstring for the additional bucket of damage by slowing enemies. Again, if you have heavy bleed damage, I would suggest putting 3 points into Cut to the Bone, but I currently do not use this myself. I do put 3 points into Pit Fighter and 3 points into No Mercy for the extra damage and crit chance. Here I will also take 1 point into Thick Skin so that I can have 3 points into Counter Offensive for additional damage as well. Now on to the ultimate skills. We're going to put 1 point into the passive Tempered Fury so that we can have 3 points into Invigorating Fury for some healing. You may want to have 3 points into Tempered Fury as well as getting certain rare Paragon nodes to have as much Fury as possible, and I'll explain why in a bit. I like to have 1 point into Wrath of the Berserker for even more damage. We also want Prime Wrath of the Berserker and Supreme Wrath of the Berserker for extra damage. The key passive that I like to use is going to be Unbridled Rage, which gives us a huge boost to our Whirlwind damage output. This is also why we take some skills that give us more Fury generation, as well as to make up for what this passive takes away from us in return. Again, if you're more heavy on the bleed side of this build, you could change the Gushing Wounds to make Rupture do more damage. This is a dual wield build, but if you like the two-hander option more, some of these other passives are for two-handed weapons and bludgeoning weapons. One of the reasons I choose the dual wield is because if you use two swords, you automatically get more fury upon lucky hits, which helps us to maintain our whirlwind while getting to take advantage of choosing a different weapon expertise. I choose two-handed axe expertise for the 15% damage against vulnerable enemies. Next up, to explain the skill rotation and how this build deals its damage. The first thing you're going to be doing is making a habit of hitting 2 or 3 small targets with lunging strike before using your whirlwind. The reason for this is the aspect of the expectant mentioned earlier snapshots your damage after it has been increased by 30% and then applies that to your whirlwind damage the entire time you're using the skill until it is cancelled. The idea is to lunge at 3 enemies, dash into so that you're surrounded by at least 5 mobs, and use all of your shouts and Wrath of the Berserker at the same time. This allows you to whirlwind for the max amount of time while doing the most damage, being able to move around to all of the mobs in the group while gaining life and reducing incoming damage all at the same time. Next up is showing you what legendary gear aspects make this build work. On my helmet, I use the aspect of Disobedience. This gives you a good amount of additional armor during your whirlwind, which helps mitigate incoming damage. I use the unique legendary Rage of Haragath, which is the best in slot chest piece. This helps shorten the cooldown time of all of your shouts. I use the unique legendary Gore's Devastating Grips for extra whirlwind damage. I've not tested the difference but would prefer regular legendary gloves with forward whirlwind and good crit chance. However, these are still useful. I use the unique legendary pants Temerity, which are best in slot by far. These allow you to be healed consistently while whirlwinding, helping to keep you alive as well as giving you a barrier. For the boots, I use Grasping Whirlwind aspect. This is a good option. It's nice on occasion when it gathers all the mobs, making your whirlwind much more effective. You could also opt to use Ghostwalker here instead. On my amulet, I have recently switched to Expectant. As stated previously, using Lunging Strike before Whirlwind allows to utilize this 30% of extra damage. On my first ring, I used the Bold Chieftain's aspect, which is super important for this build. If you always use this when surrounded by mobs, it will cut 6 seconds cooldown off of all of your shouts. My second ring is the Echoing Fury aspect, which is another fury generator to keep your whirlwind going as long as possible. On my two-handed mace, I use Dire Whirlwind for double its effect. This gives me the most crit chance possible and is also crucial to this build so that you don't have to sacrifice affixes on things such as rings. My first one-handed weapon is a I don't even know how to say that. Romulani's Magnum Opus, which gives us a huge boost to our damage as long as we keep our Fury maxed while whirlwinding. My second sword has the aspect of Edge Masters for increased damage based on our Fury as well. You want to have one-handed weapons to be swords, both of them to benefit from the Fury generating one-handed sword expertise. Finally, our two-handed slashing weapon has Limitless Rage on it for additional damage as well. This weapon can be anything since our Whirlwind uses our two one-handers instead of a two-hander. If you are a bleed heavy build, you can also choose to use Berserk Ripping on one of your weapons to take advantage of the bleed damage. Don't forget that some of these aspects are available in the Codex of Power and can be used very early on in your build, but will need to be replaced later by versions of the aspects that come from equipment found in the game. The reason for this is that the aspects used for your codex will always have the lowest possible percentage rates on every single time. The aspects pulled from legendaries can be much more powerful and is necessary to be strong enough for the endgame content. Now onto the Paragon board paths. You may see different rare nodes here that you might like more, but this is a suggestion of how I have my board arranged. We're going to be using the rare glyphs Exploit, Imbiber, Territorial, Wrath, Disembowel, and Martial. On the beginning board, I took the right path for the strength leading to the Brawn rare node. Next to the left is the Tenacity rare node. After this, our first glyph socket will use the Territorial glyph, taking all the Dexterity nodes within the vicinity. Next on the right, I have grabbed the rare node Iron Strength. Going up the left path, we're going to take the Raw Power node and head up to the first attachment gate. Here our first board will be the Warbringer board rotated to make the glyph socket on the bottom left corner. We will head to the socket and use the Exploit glyph and grab all the surrounding Dexterity nodes. To the immediate left of that is another Raw Power node. You can use the Warbringer Legendary node here if you wish, but I prefer to continue on to the next attachment gate on the left. There are also other useful rare nodes on this board, but it takes a lot of points to go all the way around the board. The next board is the Flawless Technique board, rotated until the glyph socket is on the top. Here we will continue left to our first rare node, Havoc, and we'll take the blue nodes around it for crit damage. Then we will go up to the Heavy Blows rare node and take all of the blue nodes around it for more crit damage as well. After this, to the left is the glyph socket, where we will use the Disembowel glyph and take enough willpower nodes to get the glyph bonus. If you're using a lot of bleed damage, you can grab all of the willpower within range for max bleed damage. Next to the left is the rare node Brash. After that, we're heading north to the next attachment gate and rotating the decimator board until the glyph socket is on the south end. We will use the glyph Imbiber, taking all willpower nodes within range for extra damage. To the right of this is the Demolish rare node. We want the blue nodes around this for the vulnerable damage. To the left of the glyph socket is the rare node Arrogance. Just above that is the rare node Pillage, the surrounding blue nodes for more vulnerable damage. Continuing to the left will be the next attachment gate rotating the Weapons Master board until the glyph socket is in the upper right corner. Heading to the glyph socket, we will use Wrath and pick up all dexterity nodes within range for more crit damage as well as the glyph bonus. Right beside the socket is another raw power node. This is all I have unlocked so far, being only level 86, but on your way to level 100, I would take whatever board you see useful and use the Marshall socket. The Marshall socket is very useful reducing shout cooldown, so it can be used on an earlier board and switched out for a different raw damage glyph that can be used on this last board instead. You can by all means use whatever rare nodes you see that you like for this build, but I would highly suggest using these glyphs. Next on the list is all of the gear affixes and stats to look for. This build, like most others, focuses a lot on things like crit chance, crit damage, vulnerable damage, damage to close enemies, core damage, fury cost reduction, cooldown reduction, and more. On our helmet, we want to take cooldown reduction, max life, all stats, and strength or total armor. If you don't have the unique chest piece, and you want to have damage reduction versus close, bleeding, and distant enemies with max life or total armor. If you don't have the unique gloves, you want to go with something with 4 ranks of Whirlwind, crit chance, and strength, and whatever else you like. If you don't have the unique pants, you want damage reduction versus close, bleeding, and distant enemies with max life or total armor. My boots are specifically for getting bonuses on the rare Paragon nodes, but you generally want to look for fury cost reduction, berserk duration, movement speed, and strength. For your two-handed mace, you want a combination of vulnerable damage, crit damage, close damage, core damage, or strength or all stats. You're going to want these same combination of stats on all 4 of your weapons. Keep in mind, choosing your final one-handed weapons, you're going to want them to both be swords specifically for the expertise. This also means that for this build, the item power and attack power of your one-handed weapons will be the most important rather than the two-handed weapons. On the two-handed weapons, the stats are going to matter more than the item power or the damage. On our amulet, we want things like cooldown reduction, fury cost reduction, damage reduction to close enemies, and 3 to passives like No Mercy or Pit Fighter. On both of our rings, we're going to want vulnerable damage, crit chance, crit damage, or damage to close enemies, and resource generation. I will say that when you choose to use the Bold Chieftain aspect, when you find it, choose very wisely and wait till you get a good ring, because it is extremely difficult to find. That should cover just about everything you need to know to make this build successful and work for you. I will end this video with a few more examples of using this build. Thank you all for watching to the end.
I'm not ready.
Good luck and happy demon slaying.